The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Hello, I'm Gary Stearman of Prophecy Watchers, and with me, Bill Salus. Bill, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Gary. Thanks for having me back on the program.
Always good to talk with you, and you are, I think if anybody can be given the label student of Middle East conflicts, it's Bill Salus. You've been studying these things for years, and we appreciate your studies. And I'm holding in my right hand a sheet of, that begins with one key question. Is war with Iran coming soon? Now, you raised that question. How do you react to it?
Well, I think that war is coming soon. I think it could have prophetic implications. I want to read this headline to you now that we're talking on that topic. This was back in November of 2024 after Israel had done that attack and pretty much taken out a lot of Iran's missile defense capabilities. And basically, the Jerusalem Post says conditions are ripe to strike Iran's nuclear program, a security official says, and the subcaption goes on. Iran has never been more vulnerable to strikes against its nuclear capabilities, the official said. The official added that Israel will not allow a nuclear Iran and therefore will continue to prepare to strike the nuclear project. So I actually did an article in January of this year, 2025, listing these following 9 reasons, Gary, why I think Israel will likely strike Iran's nuclear facilities. And that was the title of the article. They can read that online at my website at prophecydepot.com. But number 1, Israel has a history of striking nuclear facilities. They struck Iraq's nuclear facility in 1981. They struck the facility in Syria and also subsequently. They also have the Begin Doctrine. Menachem Begin established that, and what that basically says. The Begin Doctrine is the common term for the Israeli government's preventative strike counterproliferation policy regarding the potential enemy's capability to possess weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons. So in other words, that was formulated back in 1981 by Menachem Begin saying preemptive strikes on nuclear facilities. That policy is still in place. They use it again in Syria in 2007. Okay, the other couple of reasons, I'll go through these real quickly. Israel has vowed to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Number 4, Israel has destroyed Iran's primary missile defense systems, rendering Iran vulnerable to an Israeli strike on its nuclear facilities. Number 5, Israel will likely have America's approval now that Trump's in the office. Number 6, Israel not likely to face much severe retaliation from Iran's proxies because, of course, they mitigated against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and Assad is out of Syria now. And so there's number 7, Israel has destroyed most of Syria's missile defense systems, which enables more freedom to fly safely to Iran over Syrian airspace. Number 8, Israel has to act now because Iran is on the fast track to obtaining several nuclear bombs. If they don't already have those, Gary, some of us think they may already have 4 to 5 explosive-ready nukes on the shelf already. And then lastly, I think an ancient Bible prophecy on Elam in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39 may have foretold of such a nuclear strike. So right now we see that we've got a lot of muscle in the Middle East, Gary. You were reading me some stats about what we got over there in that area. Not only Israel, but maybe the United States may have to go in this battle with Iran.
Bill, there's something that just bugs me, and I know that it sort of plagues the thinking of a lot of people these days, and that is, how should we view Israel? The big fight now is whether Israel is destined to or has a claim to the land. And of course, the tribes that surround Israel believe that Israel definitely does not have a claim to that land, even though, of course, it goes way, way back. And the Bible speaks volumes about that land. But there's a big fight now. Who owns that land? And how do we interpret this?
Well, it's interesting because in your magazine, I think coming out, in your May magazine, I've got an article in there that I wrote called Prophetic Proof that Jerusalem and Judah belong to the Jews. And the article prophetically goes through Zechariah 12:1 and compares it to Isaiah chapter 44, where Zechariah actually quotes from Isaiah in 12:1 here, Zechariah 12:1, Isaiah 44, and through a sequence of historically fulfilled events that have already happened, we can find out, and I put this in the article, we can find out that Judah and Jerusalem clearly belong to the Jews. God has given them exclusive sovereignty. So I invite you readers, and that article is also online at prophecydepot.com. Prophetic Proof, Jerusalem and Judah belong to the Jews, and it's in your Prophecy Watchers magazine also.
Well, I'd like to say right quick, I'm holding the May 2025 Prophecy Watcher, and right here on page 22 is this article. I'll just hold it up. Jerusalem and Judah belong to the Jews. Now that is a statement, and I think you back it up rather well, but let's go into that a little bit.
Yeah, okay, basically what happens, so Zechariah 12 is a very important prophecy that I'm watching for very closely. At some point in time, Zechariah 12:2, the surrounding Arab nations are going to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. Not the nations at large. Every translation talks about the surrounding peoples, the nearby nations. In other words, the Arab countries that surround Israel and share common borders with them, who happen to be in Psalm 83. And they're going to come to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem, and God's going to make it a cup of trembling. And that's going to be a really big deal coming up at this point. And then it's going to be defeated by the Israeli Defense Forces. We're told in verse 6 that the governors of Judah make that like the IDF. Should be like a fire pan in the woodpile and like a fiery torch in the sheaves. They shall devour all those surrounding peoples that are laying siege on Judah and Jerusalem on the right hand and on the left. But Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in her own place. Now, there's going to be this siege coming because the Arabs are going to forcibly and falsely try to lay claims on Judah and Jerusalem. So Zechariah 12:1 opens up by quoting Isaiah 44 to show historically, prophetically, that Judah and Jerusalem belong to the Jews, and the article points that out, Gary. But one of the interesting things you and I were talking about before we got on live here was Zechariah 12:4. We should read that to the readers because God's going to supernaturally intervene on behalf of Israel to protect Judah and Jerusalem after he makes it a cup of trembling during that siege.
Zechariah 12:2, behold, I'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. We read that one a bit ago. In verse 5, the same chapter, the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength, and the Lord of hosts their God. And then Zechariah goes on to explain that he will give special power or authority to the governors of Judah. And that's a pretty central theme for Zechariah chapter 12.
I'm glad you read verse 5 because they get this confidence. The reason they get the confidence, the IDF gets the confidence, is in verse 4. Read verse 4 and I'll kind of extrapolate it and explain that.
In that day, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness, and I'll open mine eyes unto the house of Judah, and will smite every horse of the people with blindness. Now, we're not talking about horses here now. We're talking about modern weaponry. And how do you smite modern weaponry with blindness?
Exactly. When Zechariah wrote this prophecy, that was the military means of transport and attacking and laying siege was on horseback, right? Horse riders. But that's not going to be the case. We're talking about a powerful siege that's going to come. So powerful, God's got to turn Jerusalem into a cup of trembling. And he goes in some translations. I'm using the New King James translation on verse 4, and I'll explain this. It says, "I will strike every horse with confusion." So there's going to be three supernatural things the Lord does that are ultimately going to show confidence to those Israeli defense forces that you read in verse 5. He's going to strike every horse with confusion. Now, this would suggest that debilitating malfunctions might occur within the Arab artilleries with their jets, tanks, weapons. They'll be struck with confusion. Then I will strike every horse with confusion and its rider with madness. So now this to me would imply that the military equipment malfunctions will cause panic and hysteria among the soldiers. Now, by now, Jerusalem will certainly be a cup of trembling when this starts to happen to these Arab peoples, when they see all of a sudden supernatural intervention is going to happen. Then it says, ultimately, I will strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. So to top off the failed equipment, the panicking of the soldiers, it looks like the military GPS guidance and radar systems will also quit working. And that's going to bring that confidence to them in Zechariah 12, verse 5. So the Lord intervenes because he has to. It's a powerful siege. He makes Jerusalem a cup of trembling. He intervenes. He strikes the horses with confusion, riders with madness, the horses of the peoples with blindness, and then ultimately empowers the IDF to be like a fiery torch. And they devour all the people on the right hand and left hand. That's those surrounding peoples that think that they can take claim over Judah and Jerusalem because, remember in Islam, Gary, they believe Jerusalem is the third holiest city in Islam. It's not even mentioned in the Quran one time. It's mentioned by 70 different names over 1,000 times in the Bible as the holy city belonging to God and the Jews. Not one time in the Quran. But they're going to make a final attempt. It's going to be unsuccessful. An unsuccessful siege for the reasons we just talked about.
Bill, as you're talking, I'm thinking that today's military operates by satellite intervention in various ways, communications, radar. We've got some very exotic digital equipment that keeps track of what's happening on the ground, and military intelligence is not what it used to be. It's very, very high tech now. And Zechariah's prophecy seems to suggest that high-tech observational capability is going to be dampened somehow. In other words, striking somebody with blindness would suggest that you're taking out his radar, radio, satellite intelligence.
Yeah, and if the church is still here when this happens, and we don't know, we may be raptured before this happens. But what an amazing thing to see that the Lord will actually divinely intervene, cause that havoc, hurt those guidance systems. Syria will come, Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling, and the Israeli defense forces will prove to be powerful. Now remember in Ezekiel 37:10, we're told that Israel will come out of the Holocaust scenario, the dry bones vision, become an exceedingly great army. And that exceedingly great army is the IDF we're seeing manifest itself today. When you see them using drones and taking out missile defense systems and pagers exploding in Hezbollah's hands, and all the various things we've seen Israel do, attack Iran successfully on 2 occasions, we're seeing the Israeli defense forces manifesting into that exceedingly great army. They'll be exceedingly great when they devour, like a fiery torch in Zechariah 12:6, all the countries around them, the surrounding Arab peoples who happen to be in Psalm 83. So it's an amazing thing to be watching, Gary. We're seeing this. And the only reason the Israeli Defense Forces exist in fulfillment of prophecy is not to fight in the tribulation period against the Antichrist. They're not part of Ezekiel 38. They're not going to be fighting in the millennium because there's no war in the millennium. They're going to be fighting to protect the nation now in the present time.
Now, we've set the stage here. All of us, are watching the nightly news, the satellite news. We're watching to see what's going to happen. And with our new president, who has come in with a bang, shall we say, he's stated some parameters, and there's a lot of conversation between Donald Trump and the leaders of Israel right now. Prime Minister Netanyahu is known for his brilliancy when it comes to military tactical assaults of various kinds. His army has always been very successful. What do you see now coming just ahead?
Well, it's interesting because the relationship with Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu is very solid. As a matter of fact, an article came up today as we shoot this talking about they've talked and they agree on an agreement on every issue. And that's an important statement to say because recently an article came out that said that Donald Trump had convinced Israel not to do a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. He wanted to try and negotiate with Iran through Witkoff at this point. So those negotiations are going on at the 3rd stage as we talk right now. But I don't personally think they're going to work out because they're not going to budge on several things. As far as Israel's goal, they want an entire dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. And Iran's not going to do that. And they're not going to curb their ballistic missile program and that sort of thing. So I don't think this is going to go anywhere. Iran came out recently and said The JCPOA, which was back in 2015, yeah, it was 2015. He said that doesn't work anymore. Of course, it doesn't work anymore because back then they could only enrich uranium to 3.67%. Now they've already been enriching it beyond 60%. They're not going to go back and reverse that tide. So basically, what they're going to say to Trump's negotiator is, we don't want to go back to the JCPOA. That's outdated, and we don't want to go backwards. So I just don't personally think that's going to happen. I think Israel's going to try to attack them pretty soon. I think that's a prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49 with Elam. I've talked about that before. I'm looking at that possibly that being a prophecy that could happen in the nearby horizon.
Well, I'd like to return to that question that we opened with. War with Iran, is it coming soon? You mentioned there the Red Sea theater of action, the Persian Gulf theater of action, and the Indian Ocean theory of action, which I don't think a lot of people follow. They don't really realize how widespread this area is. Could you talk about that just a little bit in the context of Scripture?
Yeah. Well, basically, America was attacking the Houthis very fervently recently because they were blocking maritime travel through the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea there.
Now, the Houthis are far south of Israel.
They're down in the Yemen area.
So some people might not know where they are, but they've been very active. I think we gave them a kind of a tough blow, about a month ago.
Oh, yeah, and it's so bad that Iran actually kind of withdrew their proxy support for them. Because Iran's concerned about their next war that they could have with America and Israel as well. But one of the reasons was America was doing that was so they could, free up the flow of commercial traffic, ships going through the Red Sea because the Houthis was costing millions of dollars to companies because they were blocking the Red Sea. The other reason that's not really mentioned is that Iran has threatened that if they're attacked, they'll shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't think America wanted to have two areas shut down, one by the Houthis and one by Iran, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is a 21 nautical miles, this narrow strip in the Persian Gulf, and through which about 25% of the world's oil still goes through. So I don't think the Trump administration wanted both those areas to be shut down and problematic. So they cleaned up the Red Sea activity at this point, as best we can tell. Iran sort of backtracking their support for its proxies, especially the Houthis. And in case Iran gets struck and they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, Israel's got USA has a lot of firepower over there right now. You were reading to me. So why don't you let the viewers know some of the muscle power we've got over there right now?
Indeed. Now, let's put in another factor here, and that is Gog, Ezekiel 38, and the Russians. As we speak, the Russian-Ukraine war is still proceeding at a pretty good clip, and the Russians don't seem inclined to stop their attacks, assaults into Ukraine. How does that play into all this?
Well, Russia and Ezekiel 30 and 39, as commonly taught, I subscribe to this teaching, will be the leader with Turkey and Iran and 9 populations Ezekiel talks about by their ancient names, which would include some North African countries, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, probably Morocco and Tunisia, and some of the breakaway Soviet Republic, southern steppes of Russia areas. So that's going to happen. As a matter of fact, Russia right now is also trying to be involved in the negotiations between Iran and the Trump administration. So Putin's going to, he's still going to try to be a world leader. He's definitely at some point going to put together this coalition. It's going to come to invade Israel in the latter days for plunder and booty. And that coalition is, who we just talked about. So that's on the table. I don't think that's ready to happen just yet because there's some preconditions. It says Israel has to be dwelling securely, without walls, bars, no gates. And we see the great plunder and booty because that's what Russia's coming after. And Israel's not dwelling securely right now. They've got the wars with the Hamas and Hezbollah. They're concerned about what's going on in Syria with the rebels. They're concerned about Iran. Egypt is amassing massive firepower now to their south. Egypt is concerned that Egypt's going to break its treaty with Israel that was formed in 1979. So they're not dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, and they can't until we just talked about Zechariah 12:6, when there's a final siege and Israel takes out their Arab neighbors, and I believe that would fulfill Psalm 83. And that's when Ezekiel 38 could happen, but it's definitely stage setting. And Putin may be Gog. We don't know if he is Gog. Could be another leader at that time, just like we got a new pope coming. Who's that going to be, right? So leaders come and go, but Putin could be Gog. We just don't know.
If there is a well-read part of the Bible, it's Ezekiel 38. I think everybody has read Ezekiel 38 because it's so easy to think that you understand what's happening there and come to some very settled conclusions and say, oh, okay, I'm going to be watching for the Russian invasion into the Middle East. And of course, everybody's watching that. But how do you look? And you've asked the question, the war before Armageddon, as you describe it. What is the difference between that war and the actual transition into Armageddon? What do we see just ahead of us?
Here's how I would sequence the prophetic events. I could be wrong. I could be a little bit out of order. I think there's some definitely pre-tribulation events, and some of them are tribulation events. Of course, Armageddon is a tribulation event. 11-stage campaign commencing probably around midpoint of the trip, going on through the end of the tribulation period. But I put the following in this sequence. I'm looking for the Ilam Prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49, the disaster in Elam, at the western side of Iran, hugs the Persian Gulf, where Iran's got its Natanz facility, its Isfahan. It's got several facilities there, the Bushar nuclear reactors there. And all their underground missile silos, a lot of them are there. They're underground missile cities, probably there. They're underground airport. It's a strategic target that's going to be struck, and it's going to create a disaster, according to that prophecy. And then I'm looking also probably at the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17, which I don't believe was found fulfillment. It says, one day Damascus will cease from being a city. It will be a ruinous heap, Isaiah 17:1. It says that the desolation is caused by the children of Israel in Isaiah 17:9, and it happens overnight, according to Isaiah 17:14, as the prophecy concludes. Then I'm looking at the siege we talked about coming on Judah and Jerusalem by the surrounding Arab peoples that will be defeated by the IDF and divine intervention by God. And when all that happens, Gary, Israel can then dwell securely without walls, bars, nor gates, which is a prerequisite condition for Ezekiel 38. Russia will then, at that point in time, because a lot of what we're talking about are Muslim nations getting taken out by Israel, and Russia's going to be able to put together its Muslim coalition. Russia's not necessarily Muslim, but almost all of its participants, Iran, Turkey, and the other ones we talked about, are Muslim. So they're going to have no problem putting together their coalition and coming after Israel for the plunder and booty and gain that Israel will be experiencing after they defeat their enemies around them. So Jeremiah 49, Elam, Isaiah 17, Damascus being destroyed, Psalm 83 in correlation with Zechariah 12, Ezekiel 38. I believe Ezekiel 38 is a pre-tribulation event for a couple reasons. We can talk about that timing in just a moment. And then we get into the tribulation period with the trumpets and the bowls and that stuff.
Before you go there, let me just bring up just one idea. If you look at a map of the Middle East, you've got Russia up north, and then you come south to Turkey and Iran, and then you come down to Syria, and then over to the east is Iraq. And there's an absolute huge geography around tiny, tiny little Israel at the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. And it's overwhelming when you look at square miles. Israel almost disappears. And it always makes, as you're talking about, you're envisioning this sequence of events that must come. How do you put these things in order? Where will the first big move come from in this war that's really not the Battle of Armageddon? It's before that.
I actually wrote an article called Gogs' Evil Plan Blockade the Waterways, which I think is, I mean, I'm sort of speculating here, but I think part one is, the part two will be the invasion. Russia will put together its coalition. It will come upon, from the far north, outermost parts of the north, upon the mountains of Israel, will be defeated by God supernaturally. But I believe in the first stage of his Gog's evil plan, he's going to try to choke off Israel's commerce, because Israel's got commercial contracts going. They got booty. They got a lot of wealth and prosperity at that point in time. They're dwelling securely. They got the merchants of Tarshish, meaning a commercial theme, and the young lions. There's some protesters on the sidelines saying to Russia, "What are you doing? You're coming after Israel's prosperity. We have contracts with them." I think what Russia's going to try to do is choke off that commerce. Because if you look strategically at the geographical locations of all of Russia's coalition, you have the Persian Gulf could be blocked off by Iran. The Red Sea could be blocked off by Sudan and Somalia. The Mediterranean Sea could be blocked off to the north by Turkey, to the south by Morocco and Tunisia and Libya. I think the first thing they're trying to do is choke off Israel's commercial waterways and access. And then I think they can try to move in and take over Israel's prosperity once they've choked it off. Now, I'm sort of speculating on that, blockade the waterways, but it is very interesting to me when you look at the map you're talking about. All those Russian coalition countries are strategically located on important waterways that Israel would need to use to get their commerce out to the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions.
This is fascinating because it's such a complex geography. And when you read the Bible, you think you understand what might happen, and then you look at a map and you look at the history of the Middle East, and suddenly things become a lot more complicated than they were at first. And I'm sure you've had that feeling too.
That's why I use in my PowerPoint slides, in my teachings, and in my books and DVDs. I use a lot of maps and images and try to let people know. Because when these prophets wrote, they were talking about their ancient names of Edomites and Ammonites and Moabites. They didn't have gigabytes back then, and they would have used those too, right? But so I try to put maps and identify these people so we can find out, just like we did with Zechariah 12:4, what was Zechariah talking about? The confusion, the blindness, the madness. Well, who are these participants? Where are they on a map today, a modern day map? So I try to do that a lot because it is important. People like those illustrations, Gary.
Now, we've all heard about the Battle of Armageddon, and I want to get back to this because you've written quite a bit on it. To you, there is no confusion between the Battle of Ezekiel 38 and the Battle of Armageddon. You put those in two different categories. And for those who are listening, I think it'd be good if you would clarify that again.
Yes. There are some people who do think that Ezekiel 38 is part of the Armageddon scenario. I think there's reasons why it's not. Armageddon, we talked about, Gary, that puts you into the mid part to the latter part of the tribulation, the 7-year tribulation. One of the stumbling blocks I would have with that being the timing is because we're told that when the invasion happens, the Gog and Magog invasion happens, God stops it supernaturally with great earthquake, fire, great hailstones, flooding rains, fire and brimstone. He stops it supernaturally. And then we're told that the Israelis are going to take the weapons and they're going to convert them into fuel for 7 years, which they could do before the tribulation for 3.5 years. They could do it in the first half of the tribulation for 3.5 years. In the second half, they're fleeing for their lives because the Antichrist is trying to commit genocide of the Jews. And if anything, they'd grab a weapon to use it to defend themselves in their exile. So one of the arguments many of us, Ron Rhodes and Dr. Fruchtenbaum and David Reagan and others use, is that it's a pre-tribulation event for that reason, not an Armageddon event. So they could convert fuel for the first 3.5 years before the tribulation. They could convert fuel for the first 3.5 years in the tribulation, and then it would stop. They could have 8 or 9 years worth of fuel, but they would have to abruptly stop it at the midpoint of the tribulation. That's one of the reasons. The other thing, too, though, is when you look at Zechariah 14, which is one of the common places you go to find out about Armageddon, it says here, Zechariah 14, verses 1 through 3, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. God will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. So what we have here is we have, unlike Zechariah 12, cup of trembling, unsuccessful siege. Zechariah 14 is a very successful siege, gathered together by God, the armies of the world, led by the Antichrist. They're going to ransack the houses and ravish the women. So I have a problem with that when you try to compare that to Ezekiel 38, because what happens with Ezekiel 38, the Russians are going to come down when people are living at peace, with all their armies, led by Russia, Turkey, and Iran from the uttermost parts of the north. They're going to attack Jerusalem, and when this battle happens, we're told God says, I will be very furious. My fury will show on my face. So then the question is, okay, what's God going to do with that blazing anger? I've written an article on this, by the way, called Why Ezekiel 38 is Not Part of Armageddon. And it's basically, here's what you would have to say. So how will God, I'm going to read from the article to make it easier. So how will God unleash his blazing anger toward the armies on the day that they invade Israel, the Gog and Magog invaders, if it's part of Armageddon, and attack the city of Jerusalem? Shockingly, he will gather all the remaining world armies, we just read in Zechariah 14, that are separate from the already invading Magog nations, and bring them to attack Jerusalem to successfully capture the holy city. And he says, I will gather all nations to Jerusalem. These additional armies are headed by the beast, the Antichrist, according to Revelation 19. Then the Lord allots some time for the armies to loot houses and rape women in Jerusalem. The Lord will also allow armies more time to take half the population of Jerusalem and send them into exile. Then after all this heinous and despicable behavior, the Lord finally decides enough already and deploys Jesus Christ to single-handedly go and stop the fight against those nations. So it doesn't make any sense that God would be furious. He's got blazing anger, but he's going to gather the armies of Armageddon to Jerusalem, allow them time to ransack the houses and rape the women. Is that how he's going to show his anger? I don't think so. I also get another three more reasons why it doesn't make sense. But Gary, I think there's valid reasons I put out in the article why that's just not part of Armageddon.
So if you are positing then that this could happen at any moment, nothing has to happen prior to Ezekiel 38, 39.
I don't think it's imminent. I've written an article on that as well. Is Ezekiel 38 imminent? Because there's some prerequisite conditions. Israel has to be dwelling securely in the midst of the land without walls, bars, nor gates, and receipt of this great prosperity. That's the carrot on the string that Russia comes after with its coalition, that plunder and booty. And that Israel doesn't exist just yet. It's on the verge of it once the IDF takes out all its Arab neighbors in Psalm 83 and Zechariah 12:6. But I think Ezekiel 38 stage setting, but it's not ready to happen just yet.
But it could happen. Well, the Bible says that it will be in what it calls, quote unquote, the latter day. And then in Ezekiel 39:8, behold, it is come, it is done, saith the Lord God. This is the day whereof I have spoken. So there's actually a block of time set out here, but I think putting it in sequence is what we're after now.
Yeah, because the latter days we're in that. I think we all agree we're in the latter years, latter days right now. So the timing is right for that, for several things to happen. That same term is used in Jeremiah chapter 49 dealing with the Ilam Prophecy. It'll happen in the latter days. And that hasn't happened yet either. So and Iran's in both Ezekiel 38 and Jeremiah chapter 49. Elam in Jeremiah chapter 49, but Persia in Ezekiel 38. So two distinctly different geographies. When you look at a map of Iran today, you have Elam would hug the Persian Gulf, but Persia was the other section, the 2/3 of Iran proper. And they were all separated geographically by the Zagros Mountains, isolated from each other. So these two contemporaries, Jeremiah wrote around 596 BC about Elam. About 2 decades later, Ezekiel writes about Persia. two different prophecies regarding Iran that are both going to happen in the latter years. I think the Ilam prophecy happens first, and it's distinctly different than the Ezekiel 38 prophecy for numerous reasons. I've also written an article on that. But basically, so I think Ezekiel 38, it's the latter days, it's stage setting. All that needs to have happened is they dwell securely without walls, bars, nor gates. In the midst of the land is a peaceful people, a safe-dwelling people. And that Israel doesn't exist just yet.
Okay, but let's put it together now. We have a dynamic new president. He has a close relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. We have Iran here as the wild card. Iran is going to dig in its heels no matter what. How is this going to work out according to your interpretation through Scripture?
I think initially there's going to be some diplomacy attempted. Already Iran is meeting with Saudi Arabia. They're meeting with Russia and strong relations with Russia. Russia's trying to intervene on some level with the negotiations. They're talking to the leader of Oman. I think Iran is also deeply embedded with China. Remember, Russia and China were part of the P5+1. It was Russia, China, France, Britain, the United States. P5+1 was Germany back in the JCPOA in 2015. Now, Russia and China have really jumped on board with Iran. They're not having a major problem with Iran's nuclear program. Iran is trying to get diplomacy, get them involved, get them in the middle of the negotiations with America. But ultimately, it's not going to prevail because in Jeremiah chapter 49, the Ilam prophecy, which is the strategic target for Israel to strike on the West Coast, it's going to happen. And when that happens, it's going to create a disaster, we're told. And that's going to blow everybody away. That'll be a prophecy that finds fulfillment, in my estimation, probably in the very near future.
Okay, now you're talking about the Ilam prophecy, which I've heard you talk about for quite a while. For those who might not be quite as acquainted with that geographically, where is Ilam? And
it's on the southwest side of, and primarily west side, hugging the Persian Gulf of Iran. It's about a third of the size of modern-day Iran. Persia comprises about two-thirds of the rest of it. And basically, with the 6 verses in Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39, and I'll summarize them in a nutshell. There's going to come a time when the Lord gets fiercely angry with the leaders of Iran because he's going to destroy from there the kings and the princes, we're told. He's going to be fiercely angry. He's going to bring about a disaster because of his anger. And we're told the reason he's angry is because they want to launch something lethal somewhere because he says, I have to break the bow of Elam. Missile launching capabilities at the foremost of their might, probably nuclear. He's not going to allow them to send a nuclear weapon over to Israel. He's going to break the bow. And when it happens, it says he'll bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven. And he'll scatter all those indigenous population, the Iranians that are affected there, the Elamites, ancient Elamites. And all those winds, it says there'll be no nations, plural, where the Elamites don't get scattered, where they don't go. And he says that's going to happen. And that's, to me, Gary, that's what we're going to probably be seeing here pretty soon. This disaster happening because the bow of Elam is going to be broken, probably that area. That's where their missile launching capabilities are. Like I said, they have Natanz there, Isfahan's there, the Bashar nuclear reactors there.
Again, Elam on the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
Kind of right across from Saudi Arabia, all that money, and all those wealthy and influential sheiks are right across the Persian Gulf from the area you're talking about.
Yeah, and they also need the Persian Gulf to be wide open because they're exporting about 25% of the world's oil through the Strait of Hormuz through there. So everything's very dynamic right now. And Iran has said on numerous occasions, if you strike us, we're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And that's not an idle threat. And I think Donald Trump, that's why he's got all his muscle power over there in that area, because he's concerned not only to strike Iran, but also to protect the Persian Gulf as well.
So if we go back and look at the scriptures we've been talking about, what we are seeing, and I'm speaking from just a surveyor's point of view, what we're seeing looks really dynamic, unstable, and I think everybody in the world is looking at this thing and saying it's got to break down somehow. What does the Bible say? And you've been working on this for years. As we're nearing the end of our time here, put it together again for us, sort of sequentially. What do you see coming next, and then after that?
Well, I would say I hope what I see coming next is the rapture, because when we see all these things, the stage setting that we're seeing, and the rapture being an imminent event, I think we need to redeem the time, Gary, like we're doing with your program here, because Jesus could come at any given moment, and he wants to come. One of the things Chuck Missler told me before he passed away, dear friend Chuck Missler, was one of the most significant things that amazed him in all of his ministry is that Jesus, he almost said this tearfully, he said that Jesus yearns to come get us, Bill. Jesus yearns, he's wanting to come get us. He's seeking to come get us. So in my estimation, he's probably bothering Heavenly Father daily going, when can I go get my bride? When can I go get my bride? So I'm watching for that very closely, but trying to redeem the time and occupy while we're doing that, because we may be here to see these Middle East wars happen. Zechariah 12, Psalm 83, Ilam Prophecy, Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus. We may even be here to see Ezekiel 38, because I believe all those events are pre-tribulation, and I have a book called The Future War Prophecies that explains the timing on all those, why they're pre-tribulation. But basically, Gary, in my estimation, Bible prophecy is about to fall off their ancient parchments and pound down on the pavement. And 75 years ago or something since Israel became a nation, 76 now, May 14th. And that was, but the next prophecies that are going to find fulfillment won't take another 76 years. It'll happen soon and sequentially, back to back, packing a powerful global punch in my estimation.
Well, we started out with a question. I'm holding up your question sheet right here, and right at the top in bold print is a question: war with Iran coming soon? And we've been talking about that. Let's wrap it up into a nice ending here. How does that question play out?
Well, by review, it looks like that is going to happen soon. It would be prophetic. Could it be stalled for a while? Probably not much longer, because Iran has got their finger right on the nuclear button, if they don't already have nuclear weapons. Israel wants to take them out. The time is right for Israel to take them out. They kind of feel like they missed the opportunity if they wait much longer. There's been articles saying they don't want Iran to stall out the negotiations to buy more time to get a nuclear weapon. So in my estimation, the prophecies are going to find fulfillment, namely the disaster in Iran, in the Ilam area, probably nuclear-related, creates a humanitarian crisis. And I think the world might witness that, Gary, in the very near future.
And the area you're describing is what we might call geographically hot right now. We have huge quantities of oil there, huge quantities of commerce, very powerful people there, and they are, I think, positioning themselves, several different areas over there, positioning themselves to take power and become the ultimate controller in the Middle East. Of course, God says, no, wait a minute, my people Israel are going to control the Middle East. And I think we really should remember that. What are you studying now that's most exciting to you?
Well, I'm spending most of my time in the studio and writing articles and doing videos on those articles. I've got a health issue at this point where I can't really travel much anymore and do much speaking, so I'm primarily confining myself to teaching videos and writing articles and things like that. I've talked about quite a few of the articles I've recently written in our program here, and they can get those at my website at prophecydepot.com.
prophecydepot.com. Also, you can read Bill's article in the Prophecy Watcher. That is May 2025 issue. I've read the article. It's very good. It's very compact and has a lot of information. And Bill, we do appreciate you. By the way, you can contribute anytime. We always appreciate your articles.
Oh, Gary, thank you. I enjoy it very much.
And as we come down to the last few seconds, I'd like to close with a request for our audience. You heard Bill refer to a health issue, and I just want to urge all of you who are watching to pray for Bill Salus. And just keep him in your prayers. Pray for his health, his strength. Pray that he'll be able to keep on writing. And we always appreciate what you do, Bill.
Thanks so much, Gary. I covet those prayers. Thank you, audience.
All right. Anything else before we go?
No, it's just always great to be with you, my good friend Gary, man. We've done a lot of shows together, Gary, through the years.
We have indeed. Again, read the current Prophecy Watchers. I think you'll find Bill's article very, very interesting. Bill, get stronger, get well, and we'll be praying for you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Gary Stearman, and this is Prophecy Watchers. See you later.